reads, "Then a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quails from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp." Fall, dead. Let them fall beside the camp. About a day's journey on this side, and a day's journey on that side, all around the camp, about 2 cubits deep from the ground. You getting the picture? So the people worked all that day and night and all the next day gathering the quails. The least anyone gathered was 10 omers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. You have to envision stinking quail lying around the camp as far as the eye can see. But while the meat was still between their teeth before it was consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. So that place was called Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who had the craving. Interesting story. Truly that story illustrates those whose God, as Paul would say, is their belly, and whose glory is their shame. They are, in Paul's words, enemies of the cross. But here again is a phrase that cannot be taken literally, for if they truly opposed the cross of Christ, they would have opposed his execution at the hands of the authorities. Instead, they were probably parties to that execution. And Paul is implying quite the opposite. He is using the phrase, the cross of Christ, as a metaphor that talks about the way of Christ, or as Lutherans have come to express it, the way of the cross. According to John's Gospel, Christ's glory is Jesus' life of sacrifice. It is the cross. In John's account, Jesus says, "For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father." In John's Gospel, Jesus is not a victim, but he is in complete control of all that happens to him. Again, Jesus says in John's Gospel, "No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's own life for one's friends." Or in the epistle of 1 John, we read, "We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another." In the gospel lesson for today, we hear Jesus saying how he has longed to protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to gather them under his wings as a mother hen gathers her chicks. But sadly, Jesus says, you didn't want to listen. You weren't willing. Have you ever wondered why a mother hen would gather her chicks under her wings? A story is told about a group of young college students who were helping measure range damage after a wildfire raged across the prairie outside of their university town. And as they walked over the expanse of blackened earth, they noticed a cluster of small, smoldering mounds. And one of the volunteers was particularly interested in the unidentifiable heaps and asked one of the more experienced range managers what they were. This veteran of many range fires replied that he had seen this phenomenon on a few occasions and suggested that the young man turn over one of the piles. He did so, and to his great surprise, several sage-grouse chicks ran out from under the upturned mound. And he was fascinated. How incredible, he thought, that these little chicks have known to find and run underneath this mysterious shelter. Then the young man asked what of the mound, what it was, and how the chicks knew to take refuge there. And to his amazement, he was told that the smoldering heap was the remains of their mother. When there is danger, the mother hen instinctively calls out to her young ones and stretches out her wings for them to run under and find protection in her embrace. The young man was profoundly moved by this symbol of a mother's innate love and protection. Both Paul and Jesus and the sages who wrote the Hebrew Scriptures and the Christian Scriptures tell us that there is great danger in letting stuff and things define who you are and become your gods. Scripture tells us in many ways that accumulated assets have a way of destroying one's empathy for others and of limiting our compassion for those around us who are in need. There is, according to the sages of Scripture, there is great danger in wealth. This is why Jesus invites us to come under his wings and to embrace his example of emptying oneself for the sake of the world and for others, or to pick up our cross and follow him in his example and escape the dangers of letting our earthly appetites and our bellies become our God. The first call to discipleship in the Gospels is very simple. It's come and see. But after one comes and one sees and one acknowledges the way of Christ, the second call is to pick up your cross and follow. Or as Paul would put it, to be an imitator of me. It is our invitation to become imitators of Christ as Paul was an imitator of Christ. In holy baptism, God has called us to be imitators of Jesus, and God continues to empower us this very day through word and sacrament to embrace this alternative way of seeing and being in the world. In the practice of denying self and living for others, the risen Christ continues to invite us into that human and divine encounter. To that invitation to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, Jesus said, "You were not willing." The question for us is, are we?